since I laid my burdens down. Glory, glory, hallelujah, since I laid my burdens down.
Amen, amen.
God, in the name of Jesus, we pray now for your presence. We pray that you open our eyes, help us to see, unstop our ears, allow us to hear, make our hearts fertile ground so that we can receive what you have for us. Now bless us in this place. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
And so today we're talking about racism. And so the handout that you received, there's the front part of it. If you look, you'll see a page that starts like that. So we're going to do the starting on that page and the preceding page. They ran out?
Yep. How many need?
Oh, wow. Yeah, they were bad.
10, all right.
That was the third page. Yes, sir.
So,
It's right up front.
so we're not going to wait. You will be able to read it and see it when she comes back. But we're going to go ahead and go forward. What we want to talk about is how racism reveals itself in rural communities. And so the things I want to hit on very quickly is that it's evident in the schools, it's evident in funeral homes and cemeteries, it's evident in the lack of equal representation on school boards, city councils, and in county government. On the sheets that you have, the first one, when you look at rural communities, when you examine the bus routes for rural schools, you will discover that children of color are picked up first and dropped off last. And that doesn't seem like much, but it is. Because white students get to sleep in and they go home first. They pick us up first. So at 6:30, we're getting on the bus. And then the white kids get picked up last as they're headed to school. We have to go on the whole route. And then in the evening, you think you're going home first, but you don't. You go the route backwards. And so, and the driver will tell you, well, we went the other way first this time, so this time we're going to go the other way, so you get to go backwards on the route. So they drop the white kids off first, and they take the black kids home second. And yes, rural communities are segregated. For the most part, black people live where they live, and white people live where they live. And so how many of you live in a rural community? How many of you live in a rural community with and you notice that white people live in one place, black people live in another place?
I mean, they just country where I live. It's not.
It's just country. Well, but that's where I grew up. Where I grew up, but the next house you could get to was black people, and all the houses were black people.
They have this
Where I grew up,
area.
because we all grew up on the same strip. My great grandfather owned all this land, and so he had 10 children, and all of them had land in successive, and so there's an 8-mile strip, and he owned all of it. And so when you're talking about land, he owned 10,000 acres. But the white people took it. Gradually they took it. They took it. And so it ended up about 500 out of 10,000. They took it. And there was nothing that he could do about it. But the bus route came through our community, and it's still true to this day. So when you go home, examine the bus route that goes through your community and tell me that what I just told you is not true. They pick up the black kids first and the white kids last, and they drop the white kids off first and the black kids off last. Well, we don't pay attention to all of the stuff, but so most of it is subtle. And if you're not paying attention, you don't see it. Because they can explain it away. Said, well, that's just how we chose to do the route.
Yeah.
Well, why you do it backwards in the evening? If it's the right route in the morning, why is not the same way in the afternoon?
Last picked up, first dropped off.
There you go. So that you examine those and you will see that it's real. The other thing that I learned is that in rural communities, above 90% of the teachers and administrators will be white, regardless of the ethnic makeup of the school. So if you're in a rural community, how many of you think you have more than 10% minority teachers? You think you have more than 10%?
Oh, no, less. I'm sorry. I heard that wrong.
Yeah. So in the schools, when you go, no matter how many black kids there are, not more than 10% of the teachers will be black. The elementary school I went to, there were 0 black teachers. 0. They had one person that worked in the library, and she was a teacher until they closed the black school. And so, and that's still true in rural communities. And so you'll see it in the classrooms that you don't see any diversity. In rural communities, when you go to the school board, you rarely have a diverse makeup. It's mostly, and this was the most amazing thing to me. You have people on the school board that have no understanding of education whatsoever. Huh? Why is he on the school board? He knows nothing about education.
Yes, sir.
Right? No credentials, no understanding of education, never been in a classroom, but he's the school board representative for you. So that's what happens. You have guys who are, I don't know where they came from, but they're on the school board, and many of them have no education. They're just there, and they're the ones in charge. So that's a hard thing. And I talked about the good old boy system in schools because it's really true that they hire the family members and they do all of it. Now, one of the things that I know in rural communities, a lot of rural communities in the good old boy system, they've been off to Ivy League schools. Not all of them are not educated. A lot of them they graduated from the best schools in the land and came home. And so now, but when they come back, they still put their family and their friends in the places around them. And so they take care of them. And when I say their family, they put their male family members in position. Because they, in their heart of hearts, they still want the women at home. That's still what they think. Women belong at home. And they have no place in the workplace or any of those things. And so that's a real challenge. And so, but when you look in your community, you're going to see. So how many of you know the makeup of your school board? How many of you have a diverse school board? You do? So, and you do. So where do you live?
Hayward County,
Hayward County. How diverse is it?
51% blacks.
Okay. So what's the population?
The county population is about 17,500.
And how many of those people are black?
About 51%.
51%.
Yeah.
So you're the majority and you vote.
We do.
That's the difference.
I'm the secretary of the election commission.
There you go.
He's the chair of the Democratic Party of Haywood County.
All right.
We're
We're
First Baptist. We run the thing.
So we at least we have one county. That's one.
Yeah.
And make no mistake, there are a few counties
We're
in America. There are a few,
Now,
but
what we find in our school system, and our public school retired now, but what we had was a number of white teachers, because our school system is predominantly black, who just don't want to deal with our children. So even when we have a white superintendent, so forth, they want to hire the what I used to call the whoopee boys, black men like me, to be in the classroom to deal with our kids because they don't want to deal with them.
Right.
So I'm gonna leave it there.
And could I add just one thing, please? I just said he's the chair of the Democratic Party. I'm one of the secretary of the election board. I'm gonna tell you one thing that we did. One of the things you should look at. He and I, when we both retired and moved back to our hometown, we became activists, and we sat down with the election board and said, you are violating state law where you have voting precincts, where you have a polling place, because Tennessee state law says that your polling place has to be inside of your precinct. They had precincts at the courthouse and the city hall and some other locations.
put them where you don't want to go.
Right, where you don't want to go. When he and I raised hell, they told us, you're looking at the wrong map. We said, no, we're looking at the same map you're looking at. Didn't act up. We went back to the meeting 3 months later, and they said, not only are those 2 precincts wrong, 6 others are wrong, and they moved them. When they did, one of the end results is we elected our first black mayor of the city.
Amen.
So look at all that when you get home.
Yeah, and so you have to be involved in it, but you have to have 51% of the population.
That helps.
When you're 10 or 12% of the population, you have a different situation. It's a different dynamic. But when you're 51%, but I heard something too. You came back home.
Now, not everybody was happy and still not happy with all the stuff that we do, because what he said this morning, you've got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And, you've got to understand, they didn't leave, and the world is very different from them, and you've got to work with them. It can be done, but it does take time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It takes time, effort, and you have to be patient, because it's not going to change
Overnight.
just because you said it. It will not change. It takes time and energy. But when you have 51% of the population and no representation, that's a problem. And if you're 51%, that's your fault.
Hello.
That's your fault. Because you can do it. But you have to take the time to do it. But so there's one school board. Who else had their hand up? So what's your school board look like?
The chair of the Board of Education is African American. She is the longest serving member of the Board of Education for over 20 plus years. She comes out of a congregation that was its first church, black church in Shelby County, that was civically engaged. They had their protest and their justice work was to be civically engaged in everything going on in the county.
Yeah.
And to develop relationships with those that were there, knowing the realities of the racial realities. They did not let the racial realities dictate their engagement. So over the long haul, this congregation did a plan of civic engagement through relationships for the long haul. We ended up with all the things that I mentioned earlier, with first black city police chief, first black fire chief, Kentucky Education Association leader being African American, Kentucky's first African American insurance commissioner. And all these people came out of this church.
One church.
One church.
Yeah.
Came out of that church because they said, yes, this place is as racist as all get out. Number 3 in the history of Kentucky of lynching in this city. And yet God put us here.
So you gotta do something.
It is long-term, patient relationships with mayors, inviting them to the NAACP meetings, inviting and going to the celebrations of various different things that happens in the city, engaging in the city. The other dynamic of Kentucky racial realities in Shelby County and other surrounding counties, particularly in Shelby County, is that blacks and whites grew up together because there was only one school system.
Right.
So they all grew up together. So this church knew how to use those relationships as collateral and power to try to do some things over the long haul.
Yeah.
Other pastors from other urban areas that came to other churches who tried to put in justice changes just because it needs to be done didn't stay.
Right.
Because the congregation, they didn't understand the dynamics of Shelby County. One of the realities of Shelby County is that tobacco was king.
Yeah.
And so tobacco is king, which means that many people with marginalized incomes at the time when tobacco was king, because it's not king anymore,
Yeah.
but when it was king, Christmas money and new car money and economic advantage money was made in the tobacco field,
Yeah.
in the seasonal tobacco fields. So the folks who owned the tobacco fields ran the city. So when they know that everybody had to do, they came and willingly did the work so that they can do some economic advance for their families. Along the way, forging relationships, and in the long run, made some political changes in that way.
Who else?
And conventional wisdom would also lead me to conclude that for many of those things that we're talking about implementing change, that you have to make a few trips to the cemetery.
Yeah. That means that some things aren't going to change until certain people go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what's the racial makeup of Shelby County?
Right.
What percentage black people?
In Shelbyville, 12%. In Shelby County, 10%.
10%. But when you grew up with the people who are in power,
Yes.
it makes a
It
difference.
makes a difference.
Because you're local and you're connected. Just like,
Many African Americans don't stay, but many of them do.
yeah,
Most of the Caucasian members of the community, they stay because it's good for them.
yeah,
So that those relationships, it's just key relationships that gets developed,
Yeah.
whereby transitions can change. And now I have to also say that there are certain spaces of power that get shared.
yeah.
The economic space does not get shared. As it is in Texas, in the Cattlemen's Association in Shelby County. It is the Shelby County Industrial Foundation.
Come on.
Yeah.
Because the main power brokers in the county are the industrial, the factories and the people that run the industrial sector of their county. That's where the political power is in Shelby County. And it's the same way.
And they keep the money.
There's no one African American,
Not one?
not one,
Not
in the
one.
Shelby County Industrial Foundation.
Yeah.
Not one.
And as long as you're only 10% or 12% of the population, there will not be.
You've got split political representation in Shelby County. You got city council, that's nice. City council is nice. Where the power is in the Shelby County Court,
Yeah.
where the county judge executive
Right.
and the magistrates are.
Yes, sir.
That's the majority of the county where the farmers are, where most of the power where that's rural power.
Right.
Like you were talking about earlier today.
That's it.
That's where the strength is.
That's where the money is.
Real power in Shelby County is in that agricultural sector,
Yes, sir.
the Shelby County Farm Bureau.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's where the power in that county is, and there's not one person of color.
Right. So, and that's the thing, is we get into places,
Yes.
but it's still not the place
Still not power.
Not
Right.
that-
of power.
Yeah, it's not the place of power.
We in a place and it looks good and we can brag about it, but we're still not
All right.
in the upper room.
It's not the upper one. So the president of the Shelby County Industrial Foundation is also one of the president of the local banks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
President,
I see your profile.
who
Yeah.
stays a local bank. All the other banks have been bought by national chains
Yes,
except
sir.
that one.
Yes, sir.
And the reason why that, and I asked him, I pastor, built a relationship with him. I asked him, I said, man, how come you stay local? He said, Reverend, it's real easy. At the end of every year, there's a guy that lives in Louisville. There's a guy that lives in Louisville that I put a certain amount of money in his hand every year. And as long as I put that money in his hand, my bank stays low.
Wow.
Yeah. And so as long as it produces the income, and you have to understand that while we have national banks in San Antonio, Frost Bank is local.
Now that's the bank.
That's the bank.
That's the bank, I'm trying to say.
It's local.
Chase ain't saying nothing.
So
That's the bank, man.
anybody that wants to get whatever they want has to bank with Frost. And everything works. And for us, that's how it actually has to go. But turning the page, somebody else had. Did I see your hand with diverse school board?
There is no diversity now.
None. That was it. 2. So, but that's progress because there normally is none.
I have one. Just have one.
Yeah, one. Okay. But all of that's good. So the other thing that I want you to look at when you go back to your respective communities is I noticed that most white funeral homes still have black and white chapels and facilities. They have black and white chapels and facilities. And you don't know if you just use the black funeral homes. But if you use a white one to bury someone, you will discover that everybody don't get buried from the same place. In a lot of rural communities, if you go to the white funeral home to be buried, and you go in the big chapel and you look and go, oh, this is nice. When you get ready to have the service, it's not going to be in that room. It's going to be in another building, in another chapel, that's not like the one you looked at. That's still very prevalent. But if you use a black funeral home, you don't know. But the other part of it is cemeteries are still segregated.
Yes, they are. I've been in Franklin for 18 years. And when I first got there, one of my members said, come on, Raymond, take a ride with me. I said, well, where are we going? And they said, come on, ride. So we went to the cemetery. And we came in one way, and it's like, oh, this is a really nice cemetery. Well, they kept on going. And I was like, what is that? Confederate flag.
Yeah.
They've got the Confederacy behind the white part, and then you start the African American part
Behind
the Confederacy. And I was like, is this real?
Absolutely.
I had never seen it.
Well, if you live in the city,
I did. I come from here.
then you probably use black funeral homes for black people, and you never know that there is a major difference.
Guilty.
Huh?
Guilty, right? I'm totally,
Yeah.
I've been in the city my whole life, so I just can't.
Well, in the city, but even in the city, you get buried in a black cemetery unless it's a national cemetery.
I guess the issue, I never saw a problem with it.
Oh.
You know what I mean? I was like, okay,
But
that's what we get.
it's not a problem with it. I'm not declaring it as a problem. I'm declaring it as something where we are clearly still segregated. And so we don't, if we don't want to be buried together, I'm wondering how we gonna rise together.
Preach up in there.
Well, now, I did a funeral at Shannon, but it was a white funeral. I never even thought about that. But anyway, I did the funeral, and I rode with the body to the cemetery. I never thought anything about that, but I've never Well, anyway.
And this thing of racism is so subtle.
It's subtle. That's what
It
it
is a
is.
part of our DNA. And it happens and you're not even consciously aware of it.
And not only are we not consciously aware of it, we've accepted it because that's how we do it.
Right.
Well, racialized geography has always been a part of our American landscape. And cemeteries, particularly in the South, is where it's most evident.
Yeah.
I grew up always knowing this was a white cemetery. Never black. You could tell the way they were maintenance, which one was which.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a situation in our rural county just up Interstate 71 where they just discovered a black cemetery. You couldn't see it because it had not been maintained
Grown
at
up.
all.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they couldn't figure out who owned it.
Yeah.
And so you come to find out that whoever didn't own it is going to manage to give it to the NAB vets, the Black American veterans, so they can take care of it. They don't have any money.
Yeah.
And they can take care of this one. They will give it to you, so it's your burden to clean up what we didn't take care of.
Yes, sir.
And how it's been covered in newspapers has just been this, we don't know who owns it. Well, it's pretty clear some white people own it,
Yeah.
but they're going to give it to you.
Yes, sir.
And all,
Yes, sir.
and our church has a cemetery, and it
Yeah.
costs a hell of a lot of money
Yes, sir.
to maintain a cemetery.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
And this group
Yes,
with no money has been given this gift. And that's how it's being spun. This is a gift to you, and all the maintenance costs come.
And they're gonna write it off their taxes too.
But so if you don't think that that's an issue, that we still are segregated and that we're okay with it, then I mean, but it shows you how subtle racism is, how insidious it is, and how we practice it and don't even recognize it. Is that?
Yeah.
And I say we practice it. We see it practiced. We live it out. And we go through all of this stuff constantly. But I was just I don't know when, but at least 30 years ago, I recognized that there was a problem with the way we do cemeteries. And you even have a picture of this historical marker for the segregated burial ground. And so not only do we have it, but we proud of it. And we mark it in time. These are things that impact communities, and these are things that we don't talk about. And as long as we don't talk about them, they still have an impact on our lives, on our emotions, and even on our interactions with each other. There are subconscious things that eat at us, and we don't know why every now and then there is an eruption, because we get tired of stuff, and then but it just goes on. So this is there's another picture of the Mount Moore Cemetery, and so I don't know if you know from history who the Moors are. But the Moors, they were in Spain. The Moors are black people they actually ran Spain from the 700s to the 1400s, and the time that we talk about Christopher Columbus, when King Ferdinand declared Spain a Christian nation in 1492, then everyone who was not Christian had to leave Spain. Y'all know that, right? So that's when the Jews left and the Muslims left, and they left Spain, and economically Spain never recovered from all of the people leaving from 1492. It never recovered from that because they left and they went all over the world. But the Moors,
They built walls.
the Moors were actually they were Masons, they did a whole lot of things. They brought a lot to the culture in America, and in fact, Richard Banneker, who was a Moor, and Richard Banneker is the person, while we don't always talk about it, laid out and built Washington D.C. And quiet is kept. Big Ben in the square. Benjamin Banneker built that clock. That's why it's called Big Ben. He built it, and he created that. So but anyway, but he was a Moor, and so the Moors were they participated in a lot of things in American history, but they have their own cemetery. Still, just another example of how we are segregated. The next picture that I had was a typical county commissioner's court. That's what they look like. Pretty much across America. These are the people running the county. And that's what they look like.
The good old boys.
The good old boys. And they've been running it. And this is something that you have to think about. I don't know if you really thought about it, but you do know that in America, black men had the right to vote before women. Right? So women have always been treated badly in America. And so it's and they've been left out, I think, as often as they can be left out.
Particularly black women.
White women too.
No, but
But you're saying particularly black. But I'm saying in the good old boy system, it's all women are left out.
Well, only white men with property could vote, I think initially our American policy was. Only white men with property
Right.
were granted the right to vote.
Right.
In the early development.
And so it's always, property has always been an
So the
issue.
poor and the white and the not.
Yeah. But even in politics, in county politics, it's still just white men. They don't want women. It's not white women, it's not black women, it's women. Period.
We just elected our first African American magistrate. And we're questioning now is what his motives were. Are you just here to be a token? Or are you really gonna stand up to your counterparts and represent us? Then
Time will tell.
I know that.
But
We've also just elected our first female, Caucasian female on our city council.
first female on the city council.
First female as the city councilman.
First female.
Caucasian.
Yeah. But the point is this. But think about this. If you live, what's the makeup of your?
The makeup is 17, and we're about 2 to 3% African American.
So in a community where that's 90% white, they still couldn't elect a white woman.
So can I ask you, because I feel you on the segregation, and I feel you even in terms of the graveyards and all of that, and I think the whole idea behind, if I'm reading this correctly, is more about marking, creating these historical markers than it is about anything versus just so people can know, because otherwise people don't know. So I push back a little bit on the whole idea of it being marked and then being proud of that. I don't think it's necessarily, it's more to mark, to acknowledge, because otherwise you're invisible, you're not seen. And so I'm curious in your line of, and you may be getting to this, so if you are, forgive me for moving ahead, but in talking about segregation, so are you saying that to be segregated is a bad thing in the context, particularly when you talk about black people in certain contexts?
I'm dealing with the reality of America and the fact that we are segregated. But I'm about to get to
that part, okay.
racism.
Okay.
I'm talking about racism.
Okay.
And I'm talking about the fact that segregation never ended.
Thank you.
See, we may have, well, let me put it this way, integration never took place.
Full integration, you're exactly right.
Integration didn't happen. Desegregation started, but we still are segregated by where we live, by where we worship, by all of these other factors. And we certainly are still segregated when we die.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to help us see that racism has divided us, and we remain to this day divided.
Come on now.
So I'm not trying to mark it. I'm trying to just help us see the reality of how we live and all of the things that we accept that may be unacceptable. But we accept them anyway. And so just having white men run a county is not acceptable. That's not acceptable, but that's the reality. So I'm dealing with that. And
I just want to make this observation about what you're saying. I think it was Beyonce, maybe Jay-Z that said, racism in America has become so normalized that we can't even raise the subject of racism.
right.
Because it is so normal.
It's normalized. It's how we live and we accept it.
It's the reality of it.
And this next one, the white citizens, the Citizens Council, those are actually white citizens councils, and they were created so in every city there is some organization. They may not call it the White Citizens Council anymore. They get renamed, but it's the same purpose, and it's to protect the rights of white people. And typically it's about 5 old white men that decide what's going to happen in the city. Even in right now, I'm not talking about the 50s and the 60s. In 2019, there's still a group of old white men that will determine what will happen in any given city. And no matter how much you want it to happen, if you can't get to the bank to get no money, you can't hire an architect, if you can't get the goods and services you need to make something happen, it's not going to happen. No matter how much you want it to. They can stop you because they own everything that you need to do what you want to do.
I think it's important for us to understand how starkly different reality is in this regard from some urban spaces and rural spaces. That the entrenchment of racism is exponentially more harder, especially in those spaces, unlike our brothers here that have a majority of persons of color within the body politic. But even in places in the South where that is the reality, there are still those spaces where in rural spaces, wherever you've seen discrimination and racism and the manifestations of those things in urban spaces where you've got numbers to voice against it. In many urban spaces, there are not that same type of coagulation of people. And it is much more dangerous for them to begin to wield any similar type of movement toward any type of social change. Where it would probably be in most urban areas where you would, there would be a conversational kickback, maybe some protest kickback. There's death in the rural counties.
Right.
I was a Girl Scout staff person, and I had to go to Shepherdsville. The people told me not to come to the school, but meet them at the McDonald's off of 65. I'm sitting there receiving all of their membership and their monies, and there was a sheriff's deputy and another old boy system sitting there, guy. And the guy wanted to know what I was doing. And I said, well, I'm the Girl Scout representative, and I'm receiving their memberships and all of their monies. And then he wanted to know, did I go fishing? I said, no, I don't fish. I just came down here to take care of what I needed to take care of to get back to the office. And the deputy, he was sitting there acting like he was eating a Big Mac. And one of the ladies said, as soon as we leave, I want you to get in your car, get it started up, and you leave because they're watching you. I was a stranger in the community, but the women were coming to bring all of their Girl Scout stuff, and I was a black woman, and I was a threat. I was out of my element. I didn't know. Now, I don't know why they didn't send somebody else to go with me, but there I sat. And then when I got to the office and I told the director what had happened, she said, we should have thought about that and sent someone with you. Because if that woman had not paid attention, I don't know what would have happened to me, because I had to get back on 65 to go down to 4th and Central area. It was a big mess. But anyway.
And the other thing I need people to understand is how difference 5 miles make.
Right.
Come on. One street.
How different. I'm talking about from Louisville. And what's real in Louisville.
Right.
And 5 miles down the highway.
Yeah.
How different. Many of you may not know, but there is a Confederate soldier cemetery in Pee Wee Valley, Kentucky. In Pee Wee Valley. Now that ain't far from here in Louisville. So many times in urban spaces, we feel that there's ways that people in rural spaces ought to be without appreciating how starkly different the racial dynamics are in those communities. Now that doesn't mean that that's not a place to go minister, because there are still God's people that are there in those communities that need the love of God. But as Dr. Bryant has been talking about, as we've been saying throughout this entire time, you have to understand the realities of the community that you're in. And the racial differences in these communities are much more visceral. They're subtle, they're quiet, but it's like a rattlesnake. When it reaches up, it is deadly when it reaches up. And the people who live in these communities know this real well. And it shapes the way they decide how to navigate racial realities in those communities.
We navigate that space with that.
But I live in Harrison County in Indiana, which is only 25 miles away from Louisville. It's at least 95% white, and the vast majority of minority people are Mexican. You can see at least 3 times a week people driving around with pickup trucks flying Confederate flags from the back. There are at least 5 houses in the county that daily fly a Confederate flag.
Yes.
And we've elected 2 women to the city council. Well, my point is that appearances can be deceiving. Both women were Tea Party leaders, and both women were financed by the good old boy system. And both women vote against people's interests, I would say, and particularly women's interests. Both people last summer voted against a house for women with children who were addicted and recovered. So that sometimes the appearances are simply because the good old boys have gotten smarter and they're putting some window dressing out so nobody looks at them.
But what's consistent is that no matter the face or the gender, they would not be there if the people in power didn't say that's the folk that's
exactly right.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be.
So they're complicit in the process.
Oh yeah.
And so can I just tell you, because you need to Google this if you didn't. So how many of you knew about White Citizens Council? So you need to Google it. White Citizens Councils were an associated network of white supremacists, extreme right organizations in the United States, concentrated in the South. They first formed July 11th, 1954, and after 1956 it was known as the Citizens Council of America. The purpose was maintaining segregation and white supremacy in the South. And the successor to it is Council of Conservative Citizens. So that's what it's called now. And so.
And when were they developed? When did they first develop?
1954. So they really developed around the time of Brown versus the Board of Education. As a result of that, that's when this started.
It was a response to it.
And so, yeah. So every time something happens, there's also a reaction in other communities to counter it. And so okay, wow, time is gone. So I want to skip to this. The new racism is to deny that racism exists.
That's it.
Woo, say that one more time.
Yes.
And this is really important because now the new term is white splaining. White splaining. It's the paternalistic lecture given by whites toward a person of color defining what should and shouldn't be considered racist, while oblivious to their own racism. So this is the problem, is that in the larger community, it seems that white people think they reserve the right to define everything. And part of what we have to know is that we have to define our own experience. We have to be able to understand it. And someone else doesn't get to decide what's racist for me. That's really important. I have one thing in there that has a picture of Tom Latonowitz. He was 29. He killed a police officer in Massachusetts. He had 111 prior arrests, 111, and police called him notorious and violent. And after he killed a police officer, he was taken alive. And that's not shocking. But Tamir Rice and Castile and Sterling and Freddie Gray and Clark, all of those were killed and they were nonviolent. They were nonviolent black men, black boys, and they had committed no crime, had done no wrong, and yet police killed them. And so it's amazing to me that we still have no response to the death of black men in America by police officers. And not only that, they take Colin Kaepernick, who opposes police brutality and the killing of black men, and takes a knee during the national anthem to oppose that, and we let Donald Trump hijack the story and turn it into disrespecting the American flag. We let somebody, see, you can't let somebody else tell your story.
That's right.
You can't tell me why I do what I do. I do what I do for the reason that I decide. And you can't decide why I do what I do. But we allow that to happen. And he literally split the country over Colin Kaepernick taking a knee because of police brutality. And he called it or named it something else. Gonna tell me how to protest. You can't tell me how to be mad. You can't.
There's an overflow out there.
So the last page in there just says that men don't get to decide what's misogynistic, straight people don't get to decide what's homophobic, cis people don't get to decide what's transphobic, white people don't get to decide what is racist, people in positions of power don't get to decide what is considered oppression. That's how we move backwards and not forward. We all have to decide for ourselves what is offensive to us and what is oppressive to us and what is racist to us. And it's up to us to have a response to it. And we choose how we respond, not someone else. Amen.
Amen.
So we have questions, comments.
Let me just add one thing to amplify what both of you just said. Anybody here from Madison County, Tennessee, Jackson? Anyway, last Tuesday morning, there's a coalition that is trying to get a historical marker for a lady by the name of Eliza Wood, who was lynched in I forgot when it was. She was lynched because they said she poisoned her employer. 3 years later, her husband admitted I'm the one that poisoned the lady. They're trying to get a marker now to put on the courthouse lawn. They appeared before the Madison County Commission last Tuesday morning. You read it in the paper. The two commissioners that protested and said, we don't need it, it's 2018, were black. And when you look, they were out of District 7, which goes back in its rural southeastern Madison County. I'm not going to say that it was a white power brokers in that district that
convinced them to do it.
convinced them to do that. But it is what it is, and that's all that it is.
There's a couple of places that I would like to lift up where racism shows up in rural counties, especially start in many rural places in two different sectors. Number one is the education sector. The existence of the achievement gap in any school district, but especially in rural school districts, is the further evidence of racist practices that's going on that get explained as anything else other than what it is. And the way that it is promoted is through the discipline policies of those schools. Where you still have more students of color that are in special ed or other labeled schools, or classes rather, and the highest percentage of discipline actions, of expulsions and suspensions, are consistently students of color. It gets explained away in laudable things, but that is stark, straight up racism that exists in the school districts. And that's, for many rural communities, that's still the modus operandi. The studies are clear that describes that it is school climate that makes a difference. And what we mean by school climate is no human being will thrive in any environment where they are not valued as a human being.
That's right.
It does not matter the gender, it does not matter it doesn't matter who you are. If you are a human being, you are not going to thrive and be productive. Your creativity is cut. Your ability to cognate is limited when you have to stay 8+ hours or 6+ hours in an unwelcoming, hate-filled environment. That argument you can make all day long. But the persons that run the school district like a corporation. And so their interests are on the bottom line of school districts and not the lives of kids. So that's one space. The other space that is, and Dr. Bryant mentioned it in his presentation, that persistently keeps the status quo from a theological perspective are the churches in the community. The churches in the community continue to promote ideas and worldview that supports the status quo. In every place in history, the powers that be always work with religious spaces to keep things going the way they are.
Right.
And so the messages that we make as religious messages in the name of Jesus ends up fortifying the status quo of lived realities in both white and black churches. And so what comes out of our worship changes nothing in the community. What comes out of our times of gathering and the way that we frame our God language does nothing to lift up persons from their oppression and from their liberation. And so that's something that, although it takes just as much loving, relationship building, paradigm shifts in worship spaces as it does in cultural spaces. And so it is just that much stronger in rural realities. Those are two sectors that do not change easily. Even with advances in communities, those things don't change. The final one is real estate redlining will never go away.
All right.
It still is what guarantees segregated living spaces. The pricing and the valuation of property is still race-based.
Yes,
right.
Yes, sir.
There are efforts still today. I've got some people in Shelby County that did the test just last year, where a black person will call a realtor about a piece of property, get one response, a white person will call and get the welcoming response.
I know you know.
That is still happening in America,
Yes,
but
sir.
even more so
Yes, sir.
in rural spaces.
Elizabeth Warren stood on the floor of the House the other day and talked about that very specific thing. In 2019, there are laws that are still on the books that discriminate against housing practices. And these laws are in the bank. They're in the lending practices. So as we sit and talk about these things and we put our spiritual minds on, my question is, how do we move forward? I mean, we can talk about the racism all day. We know it exists. It's here, right? It's Satan's plan to divide us. How do we attack his plan?
I don't put what you're talking about. So redline, there's a book written about the government, the laws that were actually created to do redlining. And then once it was decided that it was illegal, the banks kept the practice.
Yes.
And they have the practice to this day.
Yeah.
But there is a whole history of it. And so you can read about it and understand it. I don't know that you change practice. One of the things that I worked for a guy at one point who owned a drilling company. And he went to the bank to borrow money to buy a new drilling rig. And the bank wouldn't loan him the money. So the next day, he went to the bank and bought the bank. He bought the bank. And changed the people in it so that it would do what it needed to do for the people that live there.
I think we still cannot get around the prophetic calling on the church. We have the divine mandate to speak truth to power, even if it's talking to the crackhead, the crack dealer who's talking. Go tell him what you said about the street. The government, we are complicit because many of us, whether by overt or under the table, are in bed with those markets and those economic powers of level because we don't want to speak truth to power. And I was listening to those guys in the white church that don't want you to come in and present. You need to remind them that every prophet of God who went up before them to speak power ended up on a lynching tree, in a dungeon. And if we who say we are called of God to be those voices of justice in the world, why are we cowering down? You know, I'm not mad at Trump. I'm mad at us. I'm mad at evangelical Christians.
We do have to own our own institutions. We have to collectively have our own stuff in order that we can have the power to do all that we really want to do.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying about, that's all I was saying about the whole segregation piece. I think, you know, one of the things that, and it was talked about earlier, so it's, and it's been talked about in other spaces too, our kids don't know who they are, and so therefore, and if they did know who they are, I've worked with kids that when they knew their history, they walk differently, they act differently, they didn't do some of the things that they do. And so when you talk about segregated spaces, yeah, integration came, and you're right, it was not real, it gave access, but as somebody once said, you get access to go to the Mercedes dealership, but that doesn't mean that you can buy one, you know, and so it's the same way with integration. The whole idea is that in having segregated spaces, they need to be purposeful. And so therefore, black churches historically were places we didn't have a choice, but we had doctors, lawyers, teachers, everybody worshiped, lived in the same space, and people felt better about who they were, and therefore could go forth, you know, in power and speak truth to power collectively. But I see, I think, and I hear what you're saying about rural areas, as you were saying, are so exponentially more worse off than sometimes are some of our urban areas and city areas. But I think to answer your question, the collectivity, but then also we got to really find out, know who we are. You know, and I don't think that we necessarily know that. We don't know our history. We don't know the things that you were sharing. You know, people don't, they watch the news, but they watch it for entertainment. They don't watch it and then go beyond that and read beyond the you know, the sound bites. So doing things like that, I think, are just a few of the ways in which we can begin to move this conversation beyond this and beyond the problem and actually start in a good direction.
Amen.
I think that there's a difference between understanding truth and understanding fact, and that the reality that we have both to make changes for our reality is saying we can speak truth and fact to power. Because truth doesn't mean the same thing for everybody, but the fact is fact. There are facts that there's redlining, there's facts that schools exist, this and that. That's where I think the power comes in when you combine both truth and fact and speak them both in power. Because you can't take away fact. Truth to you might be truth to somebody else, and that's where the breakdown comes in. But truth and fact should be spoken, not alternative facts.
I think that this is something that, two things. How many of you knew that Richard Allen preached George Washington's eulogy?
Do they have a copy of this?
Well, in the newest book, the 2007 book, Richard Allen's book, it makes it clear that Richard Allen was bivocational. He was a chimney sweep at the White House. He cut wood for the White House, and he was a preacher. But he also was George Washington's friend, and he preached his eulogy. And many people don't know that Frederick Douglass preached Abraham Lincoln's eulogy. Both preachers in the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Thank you.